You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
For a small business owner, every day is full of surprises. Some great, some not so great. Like when a client cancels their order at the last minute. But here's a surprise you will like. Progressive provides small business owners with 30 customizable coverage options to help keep their business going strong. So go ahead, surprise yourself. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates and third-party insurers. Coverage is not available in all states or for all vehicles and coverage selections.
All episodes of A Trial by Podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only. Much to their parents' dismay, neither host is a lawyer, journalist, or investigator. Just two people with microphones and Wi-Fi. All actions discussed are alleged, and all parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. For the full legal mumbo-jumbo, check the show notes.
In 2007, in the quiet town of Thetford, Vermont, a nurse and a mother of two named Carmen Tarlton was doing what she'd always done, showing up for her daughters, her patients, and her community. She was the kind of person people described as resilient before they ever knew how much resilience she would need. That same year, a man she had once loved broke into her home and attacked her with industrial lye, leaving her blind, disfigured, and fighting for her life. This is the story of how Carmen and her attacker's relationship curdled into violence, how he took it there, the night that changed everything, and the years that followed, including the pioneering face transplant that gave Carmen not just a new face, but a second chance at a life that she refused to let anyone take away from her. This is one of the most brutal stories of domestic violence I've dived into, but it's also one of the most incredible stories of resilience I've ever heard. This is the attack of Carmen Tarlton. All right, welcome back to the pod, everybody. I am your host, Kelsey, and it is just going to be me today. No Taylor here today. I have a really interesting story for you guys. I want to apologize ahead of time if you hear any background noise. I did just move, so I am recording in a new area, trying to get a better feel for like the acoustics in here. I'm on a little bit of a busier street, so just give me a couple episodes to get the audio just right. But hopefully it sounds pretty good because I've done some testing, wasn't too bad. So if any of you out there like me just moved in the last 2 weeks and you're enjoying the podcast, I'm calling you out right now. I would love for you to give the pod a 5-star rating if you moved. Actually, I'm going to say the last month, because guess what, guys? Working a normal job, doing the podcast, plus moving on top of it, it's been really difficult. But I'm happy to be here. I'm really happy to be telling you this story. Of course, this is a horrific story. However, this is one that I've been wanting to cover for a long time. I actually wrote this back in December of 2025. When we were doing our Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we had basically focused only on stories of domestic violence for the entire month. And we were raising money for the Sierra Vince Foundation, which is in memory of Sierra Vince, whose life was taken by her boyfriend. And I actually had Sierra's mom come on the podcast to talk about Sierra, her life, and what happened to her. And their foundation does a ton of great work for domestic violence victims. And yeah, I wanted to include this story, the story of Carmen Tarlton. That month I had written the episode. However, life is life, and especially you guys know how it gets with the holidays. It gets so crazy. So I didn't have time to record and edit it. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll save this for the next time we do a domestic violence month, something like that. But I came across it when I was looking for another file, and I'm like, okay, it's been 7 months. It's time for me to share the story with you guys. I think it's a horrible one. It's a terrifying one. It is heartbreaking, but it's also very uplifting in a way because of Carmen's resilience. And this is really a story, it's a survival story. I guess let me get that out of the way. But yeah, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, I am going to cut in a clip right now with some resources. So the domestic violence hotline in the United States is just www.thehotline.org. And on this site, you can find information for warning signs to look out for, information for victims during, before, or after leaving their abuser, how to stay safe, and information for anyone out there who has a loved one who is in an abusive relationship and how to safely support them. In the US, you can also call 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-7233, or you can text the word START to 88788. Now, in the UK, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is www.nationaldahelpline.org.uk. And it is DA, I believe, for domestic abuse. So nationaldahelpline.org.uk, or there's a 24/7 free call line at 0808-2000-247. On weekdays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., they also have support available via British Sign Language if needed. In Canada and the US, you can find information on support systems and call lines at domesticshelters.org, where you are able to search for help in your specific region, especially if you need to stay at a shelter for a bit. In Australia, you can go to 1-800-RESPECT.org.au. You can also call or text 1-800-737-732, and they have a 24/7 video call option available to you. In New Zealand, you can visit 2, like the number 2, not spelled out, the number 2, shine.org.nz, or you can call 0508-744-633. Okay, and that was the clip with the resources. But if this is going to be too tough for you to listen to and you want to skip it and come back next week, totally fine. We'll see you next week. But for those of you who want to stay, let's start by talking about who Carmen is. So Carmen was born and raised in Vermont. She grew up with a strong family ties. And by her late 20s, Carmen had already gotten married, had 2 young daughters, and gotten divorced. So by her late 20s, she was a single mother of 2, and she was determined to provide a good life for her girls. Those girls were her entire world. In 1996, at age 28, she made a bold move, and she decided to relocate across the country to California to advance her career in nursing. So she ended up taking a job at a UCLA hospital in Los Angeles. And this is kind of just a testament to her spirit. She had this very event, and I keep saying she had or she was, as if, I'm sorry, guys, it's a matter of habit, and I will do my best because Carmen is still with us. So I should not be speaking in past tense about her. But she has a very adventurous spirit, and she was just super dedicated to her job. She loved what she did. She loved nursing. She loved helping people. And I think after going through something like a divorce, it probably feels like a refreshing step. Like to move across the country, it's this big fresh start for not only you, but for your daughters as well. And it was in California that Carmen met a man named Herbert "Herb" Rogers. So we are going to call him Herb moving forward, because that's what everyone called him. Now, here's the thing about the name Herbert. Like, it's spelled like herb, like herbs, but I feel like you pronounce the H in it, so I'm going to say Herb. And if I'm wrong, someone's going to yell at me, like, you stupid idiot, but that's totally fine. I just wanted you guys to know that when we're talking about herbs like thyme and basil and whatever, I know you don't pronounce the H, okay? But I think with the name, you do. And honestly, not that it matters, because this guy's a piece of shit. So Herb Rogers was about 13 years older than Carmen, and the two fell in love pretty quickly, and they eventually married in 1998 when Carmen was just 30 years old. Marriage to her meant stability and a partner to help raise her daughters. She had been a single mom for a few years. That is a tough, tough job. And I think Carmen was just really excited to have someone to support her needs and support her and help her with the kids. Now, after a few years in LA, Carmen and Herb decided to move back to Carmen's home state of Vermont, settling in the rural community of Thetford. By all outward appearances, they were a very hardworking family, very average family. Carmen continued her nursing career at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center across the border in New Hampshire, and Herb became a familiar figure in their neighborhood as Carmen's husband and the stepfather to her girls. And again, by all outward appearances, it was just an average family, an average relationship. However, behind closed doors, as often is the case, their marriage was beginning to unravel by the mid-2000s. The return to Vermont brought the family closer to Carmen's relatives, but it also coincided with growing strains in the relationship. Later, Carmen would attribute the breakdown of her marriage partly to Herb's dishonesty and his breaches of trust. Now, what exactly those, lies were, or what the breaching of the trust entailed, it's not really public knowledge. I wasn't able to find details on this, but Carmen did indicate that repeated lies and deceit on Herb's part eroded their bond. Now, by early 2007, after roughly 9 years of marriage, Carmen and Herb were living apart, going through the process of a divorce. Herb had moved out of the family home, and they were trying to live life separately. Now, there were no public reports of prior physical violence between the two, like before he moved out. And friends and family did not necessarily foresee any violence. Again, seemed like your very standard relationship. Even when it was going poorly, it didn't seem like anything extreme from the outside. However, that was not the case. Herb's behavior had actually become super erratic and possessive the more the marriage deteriorated. He grew suspicious that Carmen had begun seeing another man romantically, but in reality, she was just focused on rebuilding her life as a single mother. There was no other man, according to Carmen. It was just Herb's jealousy and his anger playing tricks on his mind. And it really was a bad positive feedback cycle, because the more separate their lives became, the more jealous and concerned he became, because he didn't know what was in her life. And it really just seemed to intensify the further they grew apart. One evening in late 2006, Carmen was getting ready for work, and before she's leaving for work, she goes to check on her daughter. This is her 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old is sobbing inconsolably. When Carmen asked her what was wrong, her daughter replied through tears, quote, "Something really, really bad is going to happen to you," end quote. At the time, Carmen was confused, and really she could only comfort her child and hope that this was just some sort of nightmare or anxiety. She didn't really know where this was stemming from. But in hindsight, you have to look back and wonder if this was some sort of weird premonition, because 8 months later, something really, really bad would happen to Carmen. Late on the night of June 10th, 2007, Carmen was alone at her house in Thetford. Now, she's 39 years old at this time, and she's just adjusting to being a single mom. It was a quiet summer night alone until it wasn't. Around midnight, Herb Rogers decided to confront the situation that he had made up in his own mind. He thought that he was going to find Carmen at the house with another man. And in a jealous rage, he drove to her house carrying 2 weapons with him. He had a baseball bat and a bottle of industrial strength lye. And if you're like me, you've really only heard small mentions here and there of lye, and you probably don't know much about it. So I took the time to do some research, and I'm going to tell you all about lye, because this is a huge part of the story. So lye itself is a strong alkaline chemical. It's a highly concentrated form of sodium hydroxide. Now, there are diluted versions that we all use on a regular basis. For example, drain cleaners, oven cleaners. It's used in soap making. But again, these are very diluted versions. Industrial strength lye is far more concentrated, and it's used commonly in manufacturing, in water treatment, in paper production, and any heavy duty degreasing. It's very cheap. It's legal, and it is easy to buy in bulk. This isn't something that is very difficult to get. And that's why it's commonly used in attacks like the one on Carmen. It's not any sort of controlled substance. And the fact that he has this lie with him, that he is showing up with the baseball bat and lie, shows you how planned and thought out this was. This isn't a spur of the moment, oh, he snapped right there in the moment and did something horrible. No, he went out, he got this industrial strength lie, and he drove all the way to her house. He had so many opportunities to stop doing what he was doing, but he didn't. And this night would soon turn into one of the most horrific domestic violence attacks that Vermont had ever seen. Now, Herb arrived to find the house quiet, and there was no other man present. Because according to Carmen, there was no other man, period. But there definitely was no other man there that night. Not that I doubt Carmen's story by any means. But instead of turning back, when he realized there was no man there, Herb just shifted his fury toward Carmen herself. Sometime after midnight, Carmen was startled awake by the sound of someone breaking into the home. A figure burst into her bedroom, and in the darkness, she initially thought it was some sort of burglar invading her house. She was half asleep and terrified, and so she tells this unknown intruder, just take whatever you want, just leave peacefully, like you can have anything, I'm not going to stop you. But of course, we know this was not a random burglar. It was Herb, and he was far past the point of listening. Without any warning, Herb lunged at Carmen and began beating her with the baseball bat. The blows were vicious and unrelenting. One strike fractured Carmen's facial bones, shattering an eye socket, while another broke her left arm as she tried to shield herself from the blows. Carmen fell to the floor, stunned and in absolute agony. Before she could comprehend what was happening, Herb pulled out the squeeze bottle of lye that he had brought, and in a frenzy of rage, he sprayed and poured the highly concentrated, industrial strength lye all over Carmen's face and body. The effect of the chemical was immediate and catastrophic. Lye reacts with human flesh, and this reaction generates heat and it causes deep, penetrating burns. Carmen's skin began to dissolve and burn almost instantly. She later described that moment as feeling, quote, her face melting, end quote. The pain was beyond excruciating, and a doctor would later call it, quote, the most horrific injury a human being could suffer, end quote. And I think we all can grasp, I think we all understand the fact that this is horrific. This is extremely painful, but I want to talk about lye and break down what it does when it comes into contact with human skin. Now, on contact with skin, especially if there's moisture in the skin, like if your clothes are wet for some reason or if you have some sweat on your skin, it triggers this exothermic reaction. And that exothermic reaction is what generates heat. All the while, the alkali actively break down proteins and fats in the tissue. So unlike an acid burn, which tends to form a scab that limits any further damage, because once you've burned the skin and that scab forms, that scab is your body's natural reaction to protect yourself from whatever is happening. And that actually kind of does its job. But because the lye breaks down proteins and fats in the tissue, no scab is forming to limit the damage. It just keeps dissolving tissue as long as it's in contact with it. And the more tissue that dissolves, the deeper it goes. So it doesn't self-limit the same way acid does. And we hear often, there are a lot of stories out there about acid attacks, which by no means are any less horrific than what happened to this woman. But the point I'm trying to get across is that the injuries themselves are definitely more devastating with lye than with acid because the way it breaks down the proteins and fats. So we are officially in the dog days of summer, which when you were a kid, that meant a lot of freedom, no school, no teachers, no homework, no nothing. But as an adult, that freedom is taken away from us, ripped from our hands, shred by shreds as we beg for it back. Meanwhile, it's 95 degrees out, and you're probably just dying for one day of freedom and a nice cold summer cocktail. Maybe a mojito, maybe a margarita if you're feeling spicy. But who can afford it in this economy? Especially when Big Wireless is charging you an arm and a leg for your wireless service. That's why summer is the perfect time to switch to Mint Mobile. With their summer sale, you can spend just $15 a month for high-speed data and coverage on the T-Mobile 5G network. Mint Mobile took what's wrong with wireless and made it right, with premium wireless for just $15 a month, so you can free up those dollars for something a little more fun. All plans come with high-speed data, unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. So stop spending on wireless and spend on margaritas, if you so choose. Go to mintmobile.com/a-trial-by-podcast to switch. That's mintmobile.com/a-trial-by-podcast. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months. Plan required, $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. Includes up to 20 gigabytes hotspot. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. It is hot, like genuinely aggressively hot outside. And I've been drinking so much water lately. When you yap as much as I do, you have to stay hydrated. But here's the problem for me. I just moved, and I recently learned that 3 out of 4 U.S. homes have toxic chemicals running through their tap. Lead, forever chemicals, microplastics, chlorine, the list goes on. And the more you're drinking to stay hydrated in this heat, the more of that you're potentially taking in. And look, I'm not the kind of person who can know that and just keep filling up my glass from the tap. So I use AquaTrue, a countertop purifier tested and certified to remove 84 contaminants using a patented 4-stage reverse osmosis system. There's no plumbing, no installation. It's nice and easy for someone like me who has to call my dad for help with every household project. I didn't even need him for this one. It's just clean water right on your countertop, ready to go when you need it. So if you want to truly hydrate instead of dihydrate, go to aquatrue.com and use promo code ATrialByPodcast for 20% off your purifier. That's AquaTrue, AQUATRU.com. Promo code ATrialByPodcast for 20% off. It also comes with a 30-day best tasting water guarantee or your money back.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
What this all means is that lye can penetrate deep into the skin, into the muscle, and it can even affect underlying structures depending on the concentration of the lye, which we know this was very high concentration, and depending on how long it's in contact with the flesh. Now, your eyes are especially vulnerable because the lye will cause corneal damage and it will cause permanent blindness within seconds, possibly maybe up to a few minutes, again, depending on concentration and contact time. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but this is part of what happened to Carmen. Now, the pain itself of, lye touching the skin, it's often described as delayed relative to the tissue damage because the chemical is still actively working. But we can only imagine how much pain this woman was in and how much noise she must have been making, because as this attack unfolded, a 911 call had been made. I couldn't find the name of who made this call, but it seemed like it was by neighbors who heard the commotion, who heard the struggle inside the house. When police officers arrived at Carmen's home, they encountered a ghastly scene. On the floor, Carmen was crawling. This is going to make me choke up. On the floor, Carmen was crawling, trying desperately to reach a shower to wash the chemical off her body. Her beautiful heart-shaped face was already unrecognizable. The skin had turned brown and was sloughing off due to the lye. Her facial features were distorted beyond recognition. Still, despite all of this, Carmen was conscious enough to beg the officers for help. And I can't imagine being one of these officers coming into a scene, seeing a human being like that, they're begging for your help, but you don't even have all the information. You don't know what was poured on her. You don't know what happened, and you don't know how to help her. You don't know how to stop this pain immediately. I genuinely can't imagine. I think I would need therapy just being these officers. Now, when they did arrive, Herb Rogers was still at the scene. The man who had just brutalized Carmen, who had caused all of this damage that they're seeing before their eyes. He's just standing there. And it seemed like he started to come back to his senses a little bit. According to police, he appeared shocked by what he had done, and he repeatedly said, quote, "I lost it. I just lost it," end quote. But what's so crazy, Herb, is you didn't just lose it, because you literally acquired industrial strength lye and then came over with a baseball bat and that lye. It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of forethought. You didn't just lose it. Now, officers quickly subdued and arrested him. But the more pressing matter at hand was Carmen. She was obviously in critical condition. First responders and EMTs who arrived at the scene had to exercise extreme caution because lye can burn anyone who comes into contact with it. So they can't just pick her up with their bare hands, or they'll start to see these same reactions. They did manage to get Carmen out of the house, and they rushed her to the nearest hospital. Over 80% of Carmen's body had suffered chemical burns, some of them down to the muscle and bone. Down to the bone. This lye had eaten through her skin, through her muscle, and down to the bone. Her face, neck, chest, back, arms, and eyes were all terribly injured. Carmen was blinded by the lye. The chemical had destroyed her corneas, leaving her unable to see, and her eyes were swollen shut and damaged, like the eyeballs themselves. Now, she would later have a cornea transplant in one eye that helped her regain some vision, but she was never able to see normally again. She was also gravely hurt from the beating. Her left arm was broken. Her orbital bones around one eye were shattered. Her ears were severely burned. One ear was literally burned off, like it just didn't exist anymore, and the other was just completely misshapen. Most of her hair had been burned off of her head. This was just a disastrous attack. When Carmen arrived at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, in the early hours of June 11th, doctors and nurses were aghast at the severity of her injuries. She was immediately placed in a medically induced coma to spare her from the pain and to try and stabilize her condition. The medical team knew that they were in a race against time. 3rd and 4th degree burns covered the majority of her body, bringing risks of shock, organ failure, and massive risks of infection. Victims with burns over 80% of their body have only about a 50% chance of survival, even with the best care in the world. And on top of this, Carmen's burns weren't from fire, they were chemical, which means that these burns are continuing to eat away at tissue until that chemical is fully neutralized. So they're much more complex to treat than burns from a fire. Now, within just a few days, Carmen was flown by medical helicopter to the burn center at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And this is one of the top trauma hospitals in the region, so they really specialize in burn care. There, these specialists took on the monumental task of saving her life. She remained in a coma. She was hovering between life and death. Carmen's father, her siblings, and her friends rushed to Boston to keep vigil. Her father, Joe Blandon, later described her injuries as, quote, pretty gruesome, end quote. And by the way, I'm sure that he was not making light of this, but when you just read like the one little quote, I'm like, yeah, you could say that again. But he did note that when the family first saw Carmen in the ICU, quote, all they recognized was her teeth, end quote, because every other part of her body and face was just so disfigured. It didn't look like Carmen anymore. The doctors were honest with the family. Even if Carmen survived, quote, Carmen's never going to be the same again, but we're hoping for enough quality of life, end quote. Over the next few weeks and months, Carmen underwent one emergency surgery after another. In the first 3 months alone, she endured 38 surgeries, including countless skin grafts to replace burned skin and procedures to debride dead tissue. Surgeons grafted skin from the few unburned patches of her body to try and cover her wounds. And when they ran out of donor skin on her own body, they used temporary synthetic skin substitutes. Carmen battled recurrent infections, kidney failure scares, and other complications typical of severe burn injuries. Shock and respiratory failure were major threats in the early weeks. Carmen's medical team later said that lye burns are among the most painful and destructive injuries imaginable. They continue to damage tissue for long periods, and they're incredibly hard to treat. But despite everything, despite the odds stacked against her, Carmen clung to life. After several weeks, doctors began to slowly lighten the sedatives that kept her in a coma. And miraculously, Carmen became conscious on a few occasions in the ICU. When she woke, she was on a ventilator and her eyes were bandaged. So she couldn't see or speak, but she could hear and understand. And all this trauma and pain aside of everything that happened to her, I cannot imagine waking up in the hospital, unable to see, with a ventilator, like tube shoved down your throat. I can't imagine that fear. Like, genuinely, like makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Now, Carmen's sister, Castan, I apologize if I'm not saying that properly. I couldn't find anywhere to tell me how to pronounce it. But her sister, Castan, had moved back to Boston to visit daily. So her family is there for her. They're there for her every day. They are rearranging their entire lives to be there for her. And she would later say that Carmen would grip her hands or move her feet when her daughters talked to her, indicating that she heard them. So she's giving signs of like, hey, I am here and I am responding to you guys. Now, this whole time, as she's in the hospital bed, as this ventilator tube is down her throat, as she can't see and she's scared for her life, she knew what had happened to her. She remembered the attack, and she confirmed this to everyone in the hospital. Now, though she did not discuss the details, she acknowledged to the family that it was indeed Herb who had done this to her. And it's hard to imagine that type of emotional pain that realization brought on top of this physical pain that you're in. But her resolve to survive was strong. And while she fought for her life in the hospital, law enforcement and prosecutors in Vermont moved very quickly to handle the criminal side of this tragedy. Herb Rogers was immediately taken into custody the night of the attack, and in those first days, he was charged with multiple felonies, including burglary, aggravated assault, and domestic assault related to the break-in and attack. Given Carmen's critical condition, authorities initially held off on attempted murder charges, but it was clear that this case was being treated with the utmost seriousness. Like, this was devastating to everyone involved in this case, and they weren't playing games about it. Rogers was held without bail at Southern State Correctional Facility in Springfield, Vermont, as the community reeled from this gruesome news. I mean, this was plastered everywhere. Now, the case didn't actually go to a full trial, largely because Herb Rogers eventually chose to plead guilty and avoid a jury hearing all of this shocking evidence of what he did to Carmen. Now, for nearly 2 years, Rogers remained in jail as Carmen slowly recovered. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to a charge of maiming, which is an interesting charge. I don't know that every state has it, but in Vermont, this is a criminal charge that refers to permanently disfiguring or disabling someone. And basically, he pleads guilty to this, and in exchange, he is given a very lengthy prison sentence. In Orange County District Court on July 9th, 2009, a judge sentenced Rogers, who was then 53 years old, to 30 to 70 years in prison for the attack on Carmen. So this effectively meant that he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars, since even the minimum 30-year sentence would keep him in prison until his 80s. At the sentencing, Carmen Tarlton, still badly disfigured and adjusting to blindness, she faced her estranged husband in court. She faced her attacker in court. It took immense courage for her to be there. She would later write about that moment in her memoir, describing how she chose not to be defined by hatred. Now, Rogers, for his part, reportedly expressed some remorse at sentencing, saying that he, quote, just lost it, end quote. You guys already know how I feel about that. I think that's absolute fucking bullshit. I think obviously he showed up with a lie. He didn't just lose it. He decided to do this. Now, the Vermont State Police called the crime, quote, the most heinous act of domestic violence, end quote, they had ever seen in the state. In the eyes of the law, justice was served with the lengthy sentence. And I want to go back to them saying this is the most heinous act of domestic violence, because I know some people are going to be like, well, what about X, Y, and Z? I think they're just trying to recognize the severity of what was done to Carmen. And I don't think we should be mad at them for saying that. While I know that there are so many horrific cases of domestic violence, I don't really necessarily think we need to measure them up against one another. Now, in a powerful act of personal grace, Carmen eventually found it in herself to forgive Herb Rogers for what he had done to her. She said she, quote, came to forgive the man who maimed her so she could get on with her own life, end quote, believing that holding on to anger would only keep her stuck in the past. Now, Rogers remained an inmate in Vermont's custody for years, but after some time passed, he was eventually transferred to a prison in Pennsylvania, and he did not leave prison alive. In December of 2017, after serving about 10 years behind bars, Herb died at the age of 62 of an apparent medical issue while still incarcerated, obviously. Now, There are no specifics on what happened to him, but the death was reported to be from natural causes. And I just gotta say, I am glad that man never saw a free day again. Man, monster, whatever you want to call him. Carmen later said that she had already made peace with what he had done to her and that Roger's death was just another chapter closing. And her focus wasn't on that chapter. Her focus was on her own life, not his. In the years immediately following the attack, Carmen Tarlton underwent an arduous journey of medical recovery. Obviously, we know for those first 3 months that she spent in the hospital, most of it was in intensive care, and she underwent a ton of surgeries and procedures. But every day was a battle. Every day after this, she had to overcome these infections. She repeatedly had to go back to the hospital to endure these painful medical procedures. And she did slowly begin rehabilitation, obviously. By late 2007, she was stable enough to leave the hospital, but her life would never be the same. She returned to Vermont legally blind, severely scarred, and in need of near constant care. Over the next 5 years, she underwent dozens of additional surgeries, 17 more operations on top of the initial 38, just to try and improve her quality of life. Among these procedures were skin grafts to reconstruct her eyelids and lips, which had been badly scarred by the burns, and procedures to release scar contractures so she could move her neck and arms more freely. Because when the skin scars, this is my understanding, I'm not a medical professional, but my understanding is that when the skin scars and it's healing, that scar tissue is much more dense and tighter than regular skin. So it makes the skin less flexible and more difficult to stretch, if that makes sense. Now, surgeons also attempted to restore her sight, and remarkably, they were able to do this partially in one eye. So she never got, her full vision back. But because of that corneal transplant, she was able to get partial vision in her left eye. Now, I'm not shaming anyone who doesn't want to donate their organs if something ever happens to them. I know that there are religious reasons for this, but I do want to talk about it a little bit. This is the type of person that donating your organs helps. And I'm not saying you're a bad person or, if you lost someone and they chose, they didn't want to be an organ donor. I am not shaming that in any way, shape, or form. It is your body. It is your personal choice. And I think that you get to make that. However, I want to talk about my personal choice, okay? So I'm not judging your personal choices. I want to talk about my personal choice and my choice behind it. I choose to be an organ donor. So if something ever happens to me and they are able to give my organs to someone like Carmen, that she can get some of her sight back. And again, I know there's a lot of religious reasons that people don't do this. I know some people just don't want that, and that's totally okay. The one reason I will argue against not doing it is I hear people say, well, then if something happens to me, they're not going to try as hard to save me because they want my organs. And if you guys know anyone in your life that is in medicine or in any first responders, you know that this is absolutely ridiculous. That is absolutely not true. The people, if you get in a car accident and they come to the scene and you are on the brink of death, the EMTs and the paramedics and the first responders on the scene, they don't care about the liver transplant list. Their job is to save you. They have nothing to do with where organs would go. They have no motivation to give your organ to someone else. Their motivation is to save you. That's literally their job. You're the person dying right in front of them. And so again, you don't have to have a reason for wanting to say no to organ donation. However, if it's something that you haven't thought about, I would think about it and let people know in your life, what you would want if something happened to you. I know when you get your driver's license in the US, you have to answer, do you want to be an organ donor, yes or no? I say yes.
As a small business owner, sometimes it feels like no matter how much planning you do, there's always surprises, like an urgent, expensive repair. But here's a surprise you will like. With Progressive, small business owners save 13% on their commercial auto insurance when they pay in full. So enjoy a surprise for once. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, and minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, so I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing. They're easy to toss in my bag on the go. Plus, they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA FSA eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with promo code podcast at Groons.co. That's code podcast at GRUNS.co.
So very quickly, I want to go through. If you decide to be an organ donor, this is how your body could possibly help people. So of course you have your heart, which will save a life. You have 2 kidneys, which can go to 2 different recipients, and this can save their lives. You have your liver, which sometimes, depending on the person, can be split and actually given to 2 recipients, often 1 adult and 1 child, because liver tissue regenerates. So you could save a child. You have 2 lungs, which can be transplanted together or separately to 2 recipients. And I think this is, I guess I have a really personal connection to this because one of my friends that I grew up with, she had to have a lung transplant. I just saw it was her 1-year lung anniversary, but she was born with I believe it's a genetic condition, but it's cystic fibrosis, which affects your lung function. And growing up, we did sports together. She was the most badass beast I knew because her lung function would be at 45%, and she's running a mile with the rest of us, and just worked so hard. But she often was in the hospital, for weeks or sometimes even months at a time getting treatment. And the life expectancy for someone with cystic fibrosis is relatively low. It is growing as medicine gets better. But, I will forever be grateful to whoever those lungs came from, and that just overall the fact that they became an organ donor. Now, you can also donate your pancreas, which often goes to people with type 1 diabetes. And this is often transplanted alongside a kidney. They can also do transplants with intestines. This is a lot less common, but this would save someone with intestinal failure. Now, on top of just the organs themselves, so we went through 8 organs. You can also donate tissue. So like in Carmen's case, you can donate corneas, and this can restore sight to 2 people. So my understanding, and again, I don't know for certain, but my understanding is if someone is blind, they will only receive 1 cornea because they're trying to give sight to as many people as possible. You can also donate your skin, and this is used for burn victims like Carmen and for reconstructive surgeries. You can donate your heart valves. This is for people with valve diseases or defects. You can donate bone and connective tissue like tendons, ligaments, cartilage, and this is used in orthopedic surgery, spinal repair, and just overall reconstructive procedures. So this isn't just, you can save a lot of people with the organs, but you can also give people who are experiencing really difficult medical issues, you can give them a better quality of life. You can donate veins, which are used in bypass surgeries. You can donate blood vessels. And for me, I broke a tooth. I broke a molar. And so I had to get the tooth extracted. And if you just take the tooth out, all your teeth start to move. So they actually took donor, I believe it was just bone, and they put it where my tooth was to hold that space. This is used very commonly. So one deceased donor can save up to 8 lives through organ donation alone. Now, when the tissue donation is included, that same donor can enhance the lives of 75 or more people. Now, obviously, there are very specific conditions that need to be present for someone to qualify to be an organ donor or, depending on the organ and all of these things. And again, I'm really not trying to shame anyone, but if you don't have a religious or spiritual reason to be against it, and maybe you hadn't thought about it since you were young and you were worried they're not going to try hard enough to save you, I wanted to talk about it because I think it's so important. And I think maybe people don't think about it enough. And maybe in the past, if you decided you didn't want to be an organ donor, I don't know, maybe you learned something today that might make you rethink it. And and I hope it doesn't help other people, because I don't want anything bad to happen to you. But in the event that it does, we can have some good happen too. And anyway, that is the end of my TED Talk. I am so sorry. That was a very long tangent. But let's get back to Carmen, who now has vision in her left eye because of an organ donor, because of a tissue donor. And I don't think I need to explain what a difference that is for her quality of life. Now, she didn't regain perfect vision, but in that one eye, she is able to see shapes and large print, though she is still legally blind, and she does have to use adaptive technologies to read and write. But still, I cannot imagine what a difference this is when she was completely blind for a long time. Now, day to day, Carmen lived with significant challenges. The extensive scars on her face meant that she had no control over her facial expressions. Scar tissue around her mouth prevented her from fully closing her lips, and this caused constant drooling. And the scars on her neck made it difficult to turn her head or lift her chin. She was just in chronic pain from the tight scar tissue that pulled on her skin, her nerves, and her muscles. And despite everything, Carmen wasn't giving up. She was working hard. She worked hard in physical therapy to strengthen her limbs and learn how to navigate the world with her limited range of motion and her limited vision. Now, her two daughters, who were just 12 and 14 at the time of the attack, they were cared for by close family friends during the immediate aftermath. And as Carmen improved, she reunited with her girls, and she focused on being their mother, even though they now in some ways had to be the ones caring for her. Now, in addition to just her friends and family, the community also rallied around Carmen. Neighbors and strangers alike raised funds to help her with her medical costs. Because remember, we have privatized medicine here in the US. Healthcare is not free here. We are paying for this. And even though you have insurance and things like that, this shit is still expensive. For example, I just went to the doctor a couple of weeks ago. I was having some issues. I got some testing done. All the testing came back. It was like, oh, you're fine. I'm like, okay, well, I'll give it a couple weeks. I'm still having these issues. I go back. They're like, we should do all that testing again because in case it comes back differently. I'm like, that seems silly. I just did it a couple of weeks ago and it was all fine. But they told me to do it, so I did it. And now I owe them $700. And guess what the test told us? Literally nothing. They all said, no, you're fine. And I'm like, it's weird because I don't feel fine, but now I owe them $700 and I have no answers. And that's for nothing serious at all. I can't imagine how much, what these medical bills racked up to. I genuinely can't. Now, on top of raising funds for Carmen, volunteers also renovated her home for her to help accommodate for her disabilities. And it wasn't just the local Vermont community. Her story spread far beyond the state of Vermont. And it touched countless people who sent well wishes and donations. Throughout these years, Carmen displayed an extraordinary spirit of resilience. She later said that during her darkest moments in the hospital, she had vivid dreams that convinced her that life is a choice. That's a direct quote from her. Life is a choice. And she was going to choose to embrace life. And I think that is a lesson that we can all take into our personal lives. This is one of the worst things a human being can ever experience. And she is choosing to embrace life anyway. And I know we all go through hardships or we just have bad days and there's stupid things here and there that I was just complaining to my boyfriend about my haircut. Seems dumb now. It seems dumb now. A bad haircut, who cares? And that's the thing is life is a choice. Your outlook on the good things and the bad things and the hard things, it is a choice. And I'm not saying it's easy to look past the hard things. But what I'm saying is you can do it. Carmen did it and you can do it too. And making that choice makes your life better. Now for Carmen, making this choice really, it was twofold because it wasn't just her positivity. It also really relied on her faith. She started keeping a journal about her experiences as a form of therapy and really leaned into her spirituality. And over time, that journal evolved into a book project. Now, by 2011, about 4 years after the attack, Carmen's condition really had plateaued. She had survived. She had gone through all of these reconstructive surgeries, these conventional, well-practiced surgeries, but she was still very severely disfigured and in pain daily. And here's the thing, guys. You have to understand that the way her life was affected was not just physical from, having these disabilities. It wasn't just emotional and traumatic from this attack and the aftermath. But there's also another sort of trauma that's happening to her all the time with the way that people treat her because of how she looks. Going out and about in public is really difficult because this isn't something people see every day. And while I'm sure some people, are very kind and polite or don't even mention it or notice or anything, I'm sure that there are people who are a little bit less polite about it as well. And it's something that I can only imagine is really tough. And there's actually an influencer that I follow. Oh, let me find her. So I follow this influencer. Her username on Instagram is burnedbeauty2018. I love this woman's page. She is also a victim of domestic violence, and she was set on fire by her husband. And she has, major, scarring on her face and her chest. But just like her username says, she is so beautiful and her outlook on life is so beautiful. And I think she would probably agree with Carmen's, little catchphrase that I love, which is life is a choice. So I highly recommend you guys go follow her. I think her story and her videos are super interesting and her outlook on these things is very uplifting. So go check her out. She talks, obviously, I don't know what that is like to have these types of injuries, on your face where it's something you can't put clothing over it or anything like that. So I'm not going to try and give you someone's perspective on experiencing that, but I would recommend obviously reading Carmen's book, but also go follow Burned Beauty 2018. You guys will love her. But because of this, because of the disfigurement, because of the pain, because of everything that she's experiencing, Carmen begins exploring a radical cutting-edge option that only a few people in the world had ever received, and that is a face transplant. In December of 2011, after exhaustive evaluations, Carmen was officially approved as a candidate for a face transplant at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. This meant that surgeons would attempt to replace her damaged facial tissue with donor tissue from a deceased person. It was a very risky decision. Face transplants were still experimental and required a lifetime of immune-suppressing drugs, which I think for most organ transplants is the case because your immune system recognizes that the organ or the tissue is foreign and your immune system may attack it and cause it to reject. That's just my understanding from Grey's Anatomy. Nurses and doctors and people in the medical profession yell at me in the comments. But Carmen was determined to regain her comfort and her functionality. Again, she wants to choose life. And as she waited for a suitable donor, she just poured her energy into finishing her memoir. She wanted her story completed. And in early 2013, 5.5 years after the attack, Carmen published her book titled, quote, Overcome, Burned, Blinded, and Blessed, end quote. It gives me chills. Burned, blinded, and blessed. In it, she recounted the attack and her recovery. And most importantly, she shared a message of hope, forgiveness, and personal growth. She said, quote, I think I can help a whole bunch of people, end quote. And I think that's exactly what she did. Now, notably, in this book, Carmen wrote that she wouldn't want to go back and change her life in order to avoid the attack. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to understand. To be honest, it's hard for me to understand. I feel like if I was in her shoes, and I had one genie wish, I would say, I want to go back to before and stop it from happening. But Carmen says that because of what happened to her, she had found so much meaning in life and so many blessings in her new life that she would never go back and erase the growth that came from that tragedy. Now, while promoting her new book and continuing her advocacy, Carmen received the phone call that she had been waiting for. In late February 2013, the New England Organ Bank located a suitable donor for her face transplant. The donor was a 56-year-old woman from Massachusetts, Cheryl Donnelly Ryder, who had tragically died of a sudden stroke. Now, Cheryl's family, in their moment of grief, made the selfless decision to donate her face tissue to Carmen, an extremely delicate and generous form of organ donation that requires special consent from the family. Like, it's not just like all or nothing. You don't just say, oh, you can take anything from her body or you can take nothing. They get to choose, because some people might be okay with their heart or their loved one's heart going to someone, but not their face. And I mean, that's understandable. It would be extremely difficult to see the face of your deceased loved one on someone else. But Cheryl's family wanted to help. They wanted something good to come out of Cheryl's very unexpected death. So on February 27, 2013, Carmen underwent a 15-hour surgery to receive a full face transplant. A team of more than 30 surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses, and technicians, led by Dr. Bodan Pomahawk, worked in carefully choreographed phases to remove Carmen's scarred facial tissue and attach the donor's face tissue. This extraordinary procedure involved connecting skin, muscles, blood vessels, tendons, and nerves from the donor to Carmen. In Carmen's case, surgeons transplanted the entire face, including the nose, lips, facial skin, and underlying muscles. They also attached critical structures to the remnants of Carmen's facial bones to make sure that everything is staying in place, I believe. They painstakingly hooked up tiny arteries and veins to reestablish blood flow. They sutured nerves together that would hopefully allow Carmen to eventually regain sensation and movement in her new face, which that's crazy to me that they can make it so she can actually feel this skin. And I don't know, that just blows my mind. Now, this was one of the most complex surgeries ever performed, in the history of ever. That's not the way a doctor would say it, but, that's the way I'm saying it. But with that complexity comes enormous risk. So I want to dive into the details of what this all means. What does tissue replacement mean? So basically, they are taking the donor's facial skin, the nose, the lips, the muscles, the nerves, and the blood vessels.
The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, and minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, so I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing. They're easy to toss in my bag on the go. Plus, they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA FSA eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with promo code podcast at Groons.co. That's code podcast at GRUNS.co.
And they have to connect all of those things to basically what is underneath all of that in Carmen's face and neck. So the goal isn't just to restore appearance and feeling, but to restore functions like blinking, smiling, controlling the mouth, which remember, Carmen for years can't even close her mouth, which leads to constant drooling and other issues. And there was a lot that went into this before the surgery, like donor matching and consent. This is very challenging. Carmen's case required a compatible donor, not just in blood type, but also matching certain immunological markers. Her wait was longer than some earlier patients because prior blood transfusions and surgeries had built up antibodies in her immune system, which complicated the matching process a lot. Additionally, face donation requires explicit consent from the family. Again, it's not just the regular organ donation. A lot of people, I think, would be okay with all of the organ donation I was talking about before, but maybe not the face. And there's, of course, also the risk of rejection. This is a known risk. Even years later, the body might begin to attack the transplanted tissue. And, it might be all okay for a long time, and then all of a sudden, the face is being rejected. And this has happened before. There was a man in France who was actually the first person in France to receive a face transplant. And it failed after 8 years due to rejection, and he required a second transplant. So even after this surgery, she has to have careful monitoring because there is a high possibility that the transplant won't last her entire life. Now, luckily, this surgery was a success. And when Carmen woke up with her new face, The first thing doctors noted was that all of that tightness from the scars was gone. She could close her lips properly for the first time in years, and that painful tension in her neck was finally relieved. Of course, her face was extremely swollen, and of course, it was never going to resemble either her old self or the donor. It is now taking on, even though it's the donor skin and tissue, it's put onto a different bone structure, so it does look different. So she does take on a unique appearance. She doesn't look like her original face, and she doesn't look like the donor face either. Now, Carmen reportedly just felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Through her sister, she released a statement saying, quote, "I know how truly blessed I am and will have such a nice reflection in the mirror to remind myself what selfless really is," end quote. That makes me choke up. She's obviously referring to Cheryl, the donor, and her family, who just provided her with this new lease on life because of their selflessness. Now, in May 2013, just about 2 months after the transplant surgery, Carmen appeared at a press conference in Boston to reveal her new face to the world. With her surgeon by her side, Carmen, who was then 44 years old, spoke in a very clear, very confident voice about her journey. She said, quote, "I'm now in a better place, mentally and emotionally, than I ever could have imagined 6 years ago," end quote. She's obviously referencing right after this attack happened. At that same press conference, a touching meeting occurred. The daughter of Carmen's donor, Cheryl Ryder, attended this speech, and she met Carmen that day. She told Carmen that she looked beautiful and that she believed her late mother had somehow picked Carmen to receive this gift. The two embraced, symbolizing the incredible connection between donor families and recipients. Carmen, still legally blind, couldn't really see the details of her new face in the mirror, but she could feel her skin again, and she could see the love and the reactions of those around her. Doctors remarked that Carmen's injuries had been among the worst they'd ever seen, and yet here she was, smiling, even if she couldn't fully feel the smile yet. Smiling and optimistic. In the following years, Carmen achieved milestones that felt miraculous given where she had started. She weaned off most of her strong pain medications because the transplant relieved so much of that discomfort. With one eye's vision partially restored, she even pursued new hobbies. She learned to play the piano and the banjo, and she found a lot of joy and therapy in playing music. She also became an inspirational speaker, traveling to conferences and events to tell her story of survival. She often spoke about the power of forgiveness, how she had forgiven Herb and refused to remain a victim. And I think that's a personal choice. I don't know that I would forgive someone for doing this, but I think it's just because I'm not as strong of a person. Now, audiences were obviously moved by her story and by her positivity and her insistence that life can continue to be fulfilling after an unimaginable trauma like this. And guys, boy, do I have the best news in the world for you, because it's not just, oh, she's making a career and she's learning music and whatever. Her personal life also found new happiness because in time, she fell in love again. She fell in love again. And guys, I fucking love love. I love that. I love love. I want to watch this movie. I want to know the details. However, she does keep the details of her new relationship private, and I will respect that. I'm not going to dig. But she does mention that she has a supportive partner in her life after all she went through. And I can't tell you how much joy that brings me. Now, she proudly watched her daughters grow into young women, and in later interviews, she shared a particularly joyful development when she became a grandmother. And I think this took on, exponential meaning to her because it was a role that for a while people didn't know if she would live to fulfill. And as you can see, the point I really want to lay in is despite this horrific event, Carmen had rebuilt her life. She had actually built a new life almost from scratch. And this is a life that brings her joy, that brings her fulfillment, that brings her happiness, and is a life worth living. So if you are going through something hard, look at Carmen, because you can rebuild and you can create a life that is worth living. Now, with that being said, this doesn't mean her life is easy. And it doesn't mean if you overcome whatever hurdle you're dealing with now, that life will just be easy. There will continue to be hurdles. And that was the same for Carmen, obviously. I think that goes without saying. There are, of course, complications. Carmen did face periodic episodes of rejection where her immune system would attack the donor tissue despite the anti-rejection drugs. On a few occasions, her face would become red, inflamed, swollen, and these were all signs that her body was rejecting it. And each time, doctors managed to control these episodes with high-dose steroids or other treatments. Now, Carmen knew that chronic rejection was always a looming threat, but she remained hopeful that her face transplant might last a long time. And for about 6 years, everything did hold steady. But then in mid-2019, she began to experience some troubling new symptoms. She felt unusual pain in her face that wouldn't go away. She had dark patches that appeared on the skin, and she noticed her transplanted eyelids contracting and her lips tightening up again. And these were ominous signs. Doctors discovered that small blood vessels in the transplanted tissue were closing off due to ongoing low-level rejection, meaning parts of the face weren't getting enough blood supply to keep living. Portions of the transplanted tissue were slowly beginning to die. And Carmen's worst fear was confirmed. Her transplanted face was failing after 6 years. So in August 2019, she learned that she might have to undergo yet another formidable procedure, a second face transplant. At 51 years old, she found herself back at that same hospital being evaluated by the transplant team again. And a second face transplant is not as straightforward as a first face transplant, which wasn't even straightforward in the first place. They had to really determine and decide if attempting a second face transplant was even medically feasible, if it was safe. They knew that this had only been done once before in the world, which is that case in France that I told you about. Initially, some of the surgeons on the case were very hesitant. They wondered if reverting to conventional reconstruction might be better than pushing the envelope with another face transplant. And I think this is like a very common ethical, debate in medicine is it worth it to try something new that has a high chance that has a lot higher risk? Or is it better to maybe not have the best result possible, but have a safer result that is more predictable? And that's really what the debate was here, at least for the surgeons themselves. Because for Carmen, there wasn't really much of a debate. She was very clear that the first transplant had given her an incredible boost in her quality of life and that she wanted to try again. She wanted another transplant. And so the transplant team agreed, and they listed her for a second face donor in late 2019. Now, for Carmen, this period was very tumultuous. She had to confront the possibility of losing the face that she'd come to know as her own. And on top of that, the uncertainty of another massive and dangerous surgery. Yet, in Carmen fashion, she seemed to remain fiercely optimistic. Now, nearly a year later, in July 2020, a matching donor face became available for Carmen's second transplant. And this is obviously in the midst of the global COVID-19 pandemic. So she gets the call that a donor has been found, and this is a rare opportunity. Now, this time the donor was a 36-year-old woman named Casey Harrington Labrie, and she had tragically died from a sudden overdose. Casey's family made the compassionate decision to donate her face tissue to Carmen, giving Carmen another chance at a healthy life. And with that, she made medical history once again. The now 52-year-old Carmen underwent her second face transplant in July of 2020, and she became the first person in the United States and only the second person in the world to receive 2 face transplants. Now, this surgery was even more complex than the first because surgeons had to remove the failing transplanted face, and this was basically them undoing everything they did in the first operation in 2013. And then they also had to redo that and attach the new donor face. So this was a marathon procedure, and it lasted about 20 hours and engaged over 45 medical professionals working in very carefully coordinated teams. In effect, Carmen had no face for a period during the operation until the new donor tissue was sewn in place and blood flow was established. Now, what's super interesting about this is that they said this second donor face was much more immunologically compatible with Carmen than the first one had been, which should greatly reduce the risk of future rejection. So, of course, this is always going to be a possibility, but it sounds like hopefully this face should last a lot longer. Now, in early 2021, 7 months post-surgery, doctors reported that Carmen was healing well and the second transplant was thriving. Carmen herself said that she felt better than she had in years. She had virtually no pain in the face, and the new tissue was responding well. Perhaps most heartwarming, Carmen got to do something deeply meaningful. She again got to speak with her donor's family to thank them. In an emotional meeting conducted via video call because of the pandemic, Carmen conveyed how their loved one's final gift had saved and transformed her life. She said, quote, "I have such great appreciation for my donor and donor family for this life-changing gift," end quote. So now, at the time, well, I guess I shouldn't say at the time of this recording, at the time of this writing, and I don't think there are any updates, but I will double check before I, share this with you guys. But as of right now, Carmen Tarlton is in her late 50s, and she is living every day with hope and gratitude. She often says that she is happier now than she ever was before the attack. Not because anything about the attack was acceptable or made her life better, but because she has grown and she has chosen to reject fear and embrace life. She even continued writing and contributed to a second book about her experiences, because a lot had changed since the first book. Now, one of the things that Carmen really emphasizes about her journey, which you guys know I personally would struggle with, is that forgiveness was key. That was the key to her personal freedom. She says, quote, "Forgiveness is about helping ourselves, not the people who hurt us," end quote. But reflecting on Carmen's story, I've already said it 500 times, so you guys are probably sick of me. I'm just being redundant. But really what I want to hone in on is that this is the type of thing that we would all understand if this destroyed her entire life. And actually, that is the lower effort option here. That's like the natural response to something like this happening to you. But what Carmen did was the more difficult option. She chose to not let this destroy her. And I am sure that was very difficult and is very difficult every single day to this day and will be for the rest of her life. And it's an active choice that she has to make every day. But it is worth it. It is harder than just letting yourself be destroyed. It's not easier, but it is but the result is worth it. So I hope none of us ever have to go through something like this, but we all go through hardship. And, some people are very lucky and it's very minimal, and some people have to go through things like this. And I think Carmen's story is a testament that no matter what scale something horrible happens to you, you have a choice. And choosing to move forward and rebuild and be resilient and build a good, fulfilling life, that is the harder choice oftentimes, but it's worth it. Okay, that's all I have to say. I really feel like I yapped a lot in this episode, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the yapping. Thank you for listening. Like I said, this was a story I've been sitting on for months and months and months, and I'm glad I finally got to share it with you guys because I really think I hope you guys found it uplifting. I know it's very horrific as well, but I guess I don't really find Carmen's story uplifting. Her story is horrific. What was done to her is horrific. I find Carmen uplifting. So let's all be a little bit more like Carmen. Court is adjourned.